Hello everyone, I am Jonathan Little. Today, we are going to be discussing and going through a bunch of hands that I played against some of the best players in the world in the Poker Go studio over the course of the most recent Poker Masters. I won a tournament. That's not actually the trophy. The trophy's in Las Vegas, but it looks just like that one over there. That was good. I had a really interesting trajectory in this tournament series because I think I lost the first four tournaments by getting either cooler scenarios, like pocket queens against pocket kings, or I got unlucky by getting it in good and then losing. In spots, all of which I found to just be 100% completely unavoidable. Now, I know a lot of people think that you make a lot of decisions in poker and they matter a ton, but sometimes when you're playing against a lot of good players and you get the queens playing 30 big blinds deep because, you've doubled up, you're hanging out, you're in the middle of stages of the tournament, and somebody gets kings, you're going broke. And that's okay. So I lost the first few tournaments. I was feeling a little bit annoyed. Then I got a huge chip stack in, I think, the fourth or fifth tournament. And then I got super unlucky. We're going to go through one of the hands here. And that was frustrating too because I finally got a lot of chips, had a good shot to make a deep run, and then was just out. Then I won a tournament. I got in a pretty standard all-in spot. I was left with 0.67 big blinds. And then from there, I won every hand. Pretty much. We were down to maybe 20 people. So that was cool. I won a tournament that I thought I was completely dead in. I actually had the bust out tweet already written. I was about to press post, but then I won every pot. It's a lot of fun. I do sell action on Poker Stake for all of you. Tell me you want a piece of the action. So I sell some action to you, which means I have to report to all of you. I'm not posting on Twitter to cry. I'm posting on Twitter to report, to be very clear. By the way, I do have some action for sale coming up. There's a Pot Limit Omaha series starting in about 10 days in the Poker Go studio. And then there are some tournaments in Vegas as well for the Poker Stars NAPT, and then the WSOP events at the end of the year. I've already posted all of it. It's all there for you. Poker Go PLO series is next. Those events should be good. So check that out on pokerstake.com. Also, okay, so after that, I won this tournament. And I won the Poker Go Cup earlier this year. There are only 3 major series at the Poker Go studio that are like long 12 tournament series or whatever it is. And I won one of them already. Aram Zobian, Poker Coach and Coach, won another one of them. And there was only one left, the Poker Masters. And if you win one of the events, you're pretty live to win the series. Because if you get 2 wins, that's sometimes enough to win. Maybe you need another cash or 2, depending on how it goes. When I won the Poker Go Cup, I actually had 2 first, then like a 5th and a 7th. And that barely won. David Peters, also Poker Coach and Coach. Looks like Poker Coach and Coaches are all the big winners. David Peters was in the lead. I needed to literally win the last tournament in order to win. A second place would not have done it. So first, a second, a 5th, and a 7th was not good enough because David Peters had 2 wins and a few other cashes. I had 2 wins and a cash in the biggest event. Or I'm sorry, two wins, including the biggest event. So that was good for me. Anyway, sometimes though, depending on how the points are spread out, 2 wins just might be good enough. And I think this time it would have been good enough. So if I got another win, I'd be in good shape. From there, though, I took something like a 12th and a 15th when maybe 12 people paid in each tournament. In all of those scenarios, I had a lot of chips, which was emotionally tough. Look, I don't really get all that wrapped up in emotions when I'm playing poker. I typically don't care at all if I win or lose. But when there's prestige on the line, it gets people excited. When I could have a purple jacket here as like a new purple green screen, that would be pretty cool, right? And I was pretty live. Going into the last 4 tournaments, I figured I was probably 1 in 15 to win the thing, which is pretty good. 1 in 15 is pretty good. And once I got a hold of 5 starting stacks and I got to get it all in for 10 or 15 or 20 starting stacks, whatever it was, I was looking really good. But then I lost. And that was sad. Very rarely do I call my wife after a poker tournament kind of frustrated, but I called her 2 or 3 times frustrated. Me recognizing I was emotionally wrapped up in the results. And I think it's okay to be emotionally wrapped up in the results as long as you are not emotionally wrapped up in it while you're playing to the point that it affects your strategy. And I don't think it affected my strategy because I was sitting there playing well and, playing like I thought I should. But at the same time, maybe it did. I don't know. It's tough to know. Today, though, we're going to go through some hands. I do have to wrap it up a little bit early today. I'm meeting one of my friends at an art museum in about 35 minutes. I'm sorry, about 55 minutes, so we got to go quick today. Let's get right to it. I'm not sure who my opponent was in this hand. This was the first $10,000 buy-in tournament. I raised up with a king-jack offsuit. Button calls. Big blind calls. Actually, I do remember my opponent in this hand, but I'm not going to out him. Big blind checks. On jack 10-8, I have king-jack. I continuation bet 4K. I think you could conceivably check this jack 10-8 board. Multi-way, you have to do a lot of checking in general, just because it's very, very, very easy for someone to have something on the middle and high card boards, including you, but also your opponents too. And especially if you don't have all the queen nines and the 9-7s in your range, and your opponents may, mainly the big blind here, you have to be a little bit cautious. That said, I think king jack is a hand that certainly can bet for both value and protection, so we go for it. If you have any comments, suggestions, feedback, feel free to type it in the chat. If you're happy to be here, click the like and subscribe button. If you're not happy to be here, go do something else. The turn is a 10, and I decide to bet again. I think checking is perfectly fine. Notice we are starting to get kind of an all-in scenario at this point because we have 48K in our stack, and we have 18,000 in the pot. I do decide to keep betting. I think checking could be just fine in this spot. I think checking is reasonable. I thought that my opponent might be kind of straightforward to the point that they raise me almost entirely when I'm beat and call and or fold when I'm ahead, which is fine, right? My hand doesn't mind protection at all. So whatever, opponent calls. River is a 3 of diamonds. Pretty rough river because a flush draw is a lot of their range, or at least a decent chunk of their range. It is worth noting when the ace, king, queen, jack, 10 of diamonds are on the board, there are way fewer combinations of flushes in your opponent's range than there would be if, let's say, it was the 5, 4, and 3 of diamonds, right? Because they can't have ace, jack, king, jack, queen, jack, ace 10, queen, king 10, queen 10, jack 10, jack 9, jack 8, 10, 9, 10, 8. They can't have any of those, right? And they probably aren't playing a whole lot of king X suited. Maybe they could have just a few. And they could have the ace X suited, but again, there's just way fewer of those because the jack and the 10 are on the board. Anyway, in this spot, I checked, and my opponent pretty quickly put it all in. This is certainly an annoying spot. And I decided to fold. Now, you all know me, I hate folding. And I actually kind of hated folding this spot, even though I thought my opponent was kind of on the tight, aggressive side. Because if the opponent's good, they're going to bluff a lot in this spot. Whenever you are in this scenario, you want to make sure you're protecting your checking range. And my problem I was sitting here thinking about is that I don't really have a lot of 10s, right? Because I would bet some 10s on the flop, but not a lot of them. And if I check them, I'm definitely going to check and call because you block boats, right? But if that's kind of the best hand I could have as a 10, because I think I'd want to keep betting a lot of the flushes, I'm really only going to show up on the river with a jack, right? That could reasonably call, and, well, here it is. I definitely remember thinking in the time that if I had the king of diamonds, I would just have to call, I think. I know a lot of people in GTO world get stuck on blockers and stuck on minimum defense frequency and all this. But look, we got to find some calls here, and if you are checking and folding every hand in your range, you are going to get absolutely crushed, even by your tight, aggressive opponents if they are good. So I didn't really like this fold, but I think it's fine. I think it's fine. I don't love it. Millen says, should we bet bigger on the flop? No. In multi-way pots, you typically want to bet on the smallish side in general. Why do you want to bet on the smallish side in general? Because you very rarely have the nut advantage. We discussed this thoroughly in the advanced cash game course at pokercoaching.com. Make sure you check it out. Also, when you're out of position, look, out of position you can bet bigger, but ignore position. Forget I said that. Multi-way, you typically want to bet smaller in general because you very rarely have the nut advantage. Also, on boards that already have a straight and already have a flush on them, and or flush, that either you or your opponents could reasonably have. In these scenarios, very often you want to bet on the smaller side just because you're going to be betting into some nuts. And like I said, the big blind could just easily be sitting here with queen 9 offsuit or 9-7 offsuit, right? If the board was jack 10-6, then a bigger size may be ideal. But even then, I think 4K into 10-5 is quote-unquote big in this spot. This is my bigger size. I think multi-way, you should be using relatively small bets in general because, again, you just don't have the nut advantage very often, especially when the button calls or the small blind call, or really if anybody in position calls or the small blind, which is always going to be the case, obviously, just because they're all going to be calling with good, strong middle connected cards, right? Why did you leave the trophy in Vegas? Well, look back here. First off, look, the bookshelf is full. The bookshelf / trophy shelf is full. Also, I have a place in Vegas now, and we need to start filling up the trophy shelf there. There's currently 3 giant trophies in that place, and I plan to fill it up with more. So I think this is a fine hand. Something that I think a lot of people do wrong, though, is they don't protect their river checking range, and they just check fold everything on the river. And, well, this is a spot where maybe I'm not doing it quite right. Spread eagle for you. What in the world does that even mean? All right, let's take a look at another hand. Pocket jacks. This is against Alex Foxen. Oh boy, let's see how this hand goes. I limp. Small blind, 84, big blind, deep. We should be limping a lot of our range. Jacks is obviously a hand you could just raise, right? Aces, kings, queens, jacks, ace, king, ace, queen. All those really like raising a lot of the time. But against loose, aggressive, battling opponents like Alex Foxen is, he's not on the tight side. You definitely want to make sure you're protecting your limping range. So we do limp, he does raise. We do re-raise. This is fine and standard and reasonable and good. I would be doing this with some blocker bluffs, lots of good hands. And he calls. Okay, from here, what do we do? Well, we hope to not have an overcard on the flop. 7-7-5, you could certainly have a 7, but whatever. This is not the amount I bet. I think I bet 14,000. My bad. Whoever input this, put it in wrong. I bet 14,000, I'm sure. He calls, turns a 3. And I basically put him in. This is putting him in. Now you may say, why shove on this 3 spades turn? Is this even right? I'm not even sure that they entered this hand right. Whoever was entering these hands lost their minds, and it wasn't me. Let's see if I can get this real quick. Real quick. This is hand number 12. Yeah, okay, 3 of spades. All right. Yeah, I bet 14,000 on the flop. He called. Turn is the 3 of spades, and I shove. So you may say, why shove the 3 of spades? Well, at this point, we're kind of shallow stacked. Remember, the pot was bigger, right? It's because my guy entered it wrong. The pot was already 30K bigger, effectively, so it was 60, and I had about pot behind. So I'm shoving for about pot on the turn. And at this point, he could easily have all sorts of overcards that have a spade that I don't mind getting protection against. He could also have all sorts of pairs that would feel pretty inclined to call. Now, if he thinks I'm like the weakest, tightest, most straightforward player ever, then maybe he can find folds with some pairs without a spade. And he's obviously going to fold with just like king of spades, queen, right? But look, I think he thinks I can get in there and battle. He knows I like to battle. This is a spot where I'm going to be very overpair heavy. But if you give me a hand like ace of spades, king, ace of spades, queen, ace of spades, jack, I would play a lot of them the same way. So he does need to find some calls, right? He does call. He has ace 5 of hearts. We get a double up early. Nice and good. I think this is a reasonable spot. I don't feel too crazy about this one way or the other. If you do limp and re-raise, you have to realize the stack to pot ratio is going to be relatively shallow at that point. And if the stack to pot ratio is relatively shallow, overpairs are the nuts. And to be fair, in his spot, ace 5 is pretty good. He did tank for a while. I get this is certainly an annoying spot for him because he really wants to have a spade. But he doesn't. Beggars can't be choosers. He doesn't block any of my bluffs, so that's fun. And he has a pair. You know, pair's okay, especially when I'm going to have a lot of unpaired overcards to make this play. As you think your opponent has more hands like unpaired overcards, mainly ace of spades, king, queen, jack, or ace with like king of spades, ace with queen of spades, ace with jack of spades, stuff like that, you need to be far more inclined to call. If he thinks I'm not limp re-raising with many of those hands and I'm limp calling them instead, which I'm not, but if he does think that, then perhaps he can start to find some folds, but he found the call and this was good for me. Betting and raising is far better than checking and calling. Well, it depends. It definitely depends, because if your opponent's crazy, you want to check and give them every chance to bluff. The problem is by checking, you give them a chance to realize their equity, by just checking it back, right? So you need to know your opponents, but look, there's certainly plenty of room for checking against a lot of players. This was a crazy call, maybe, says Kush. I don't know what Kush is trying to say, but was this a crazy call? I don't know. I mean, he called it off on the turn, right? There's lots of draws available. Lots and lots of draws available. He could be dead, obviously. The thing is, I'm sure he was thinking in this spot that if I had a flush, I would check, right? So if he thinks I'm going to check all or most of my flushes, then my range instead becomes a lot of hands that are likely good but vulnerable, like pairs, over pairs mainly, and draws, right? So how does ace-5 do against a range of pairs and draws? I mean, pretty decent. You think it wins 33% of the time? Let's see if I can pull up this Equilab and get it to work real quick. I normally try to pull up all these programs ahead of time, but... All right, let's take a look. Let's take a look. Say he has ace of hearts, 5 of hearts. Oh my god, I can't type. I did not plan to pull this up. Obviously, now that I'm going to do it, I will not be able to type. 7 of spades, 7 of clubs, 5 of spades, 3 of spades. Now, what kind of range do you think he is putting me on, roughly? We're going to be super rough here. Let's say he thinks I'm shoving all over pairs. Do I have ace-7 suited? Sure. Do I have ace-5 suited? Sure. Let's presume he thinks I'm checking all spades. And then let's go through and like put in these. Obviously, you should be weighting these, but we're not going to. And let's just say we have any spade. Okay, so let's say we're going off with these with any spade. And that's our whole range. Very simple. We're not going to be 100% precise here. But let's say in this spot we do this. How does ace-5 of hearts do? 36% equity. If I'm very simply doing this. Now, again, this is not going to be 100% accurate because I'm not going to limp re-raise all of my 8s and 9s and 10s or all of these hands over here. And I may not shove all of them, although I probably would. So you see he has 36% equity against that range. He only needs 33 because he was calling a pot-size shove. Now, how does this change if I start adding in a few more spades over here? Like, let's say I'm jamming these. Let's just pretend. This is a very simple program called Equilab. It's free. Oh, how do you get the Peak GTO trainer? Send us an email, support@pokercoaching.com. We will be launching to everyone soon. As you see now, if we add in just a few flushes, his equity goes down to 34%. So something like that. And this is, I'm sure this is what he's thinking. He's probably thinking I'm roughly break even. So if you think you're roughly break even or even a little bit good, should you overfold? And look, Foxland is happy to rebuy Infinite. He's playing the early levels pretty much like a cash game. And that is how a lot of these players play. I typically don't play quite so re-entry heavy because I think there's a lot of merit in surviving in general. And that's going to result in me, well, you know, not being the chip leader very often, but also not being in for 3 bullets very often either. I was in for 2 bullets, and I think 3 out of the 10 tournaments or whatever it was. So not many, right? And I don't know. I'm not going to say it's necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It's certainly like a lower variance strategy, I think. You have to say there's a lower variance if you're not re-entering. Well, not necessarily, because if you re-enter, you inevitably win the tournament way more often. And if you have an edge over and over again, you don't really mind re-entering, right? You want to re-enter as many times as you can with an edge. So, I don't know. I think this is a spot where his call is close. He recognized it was close. He used some time banks. He thought about it. He decided to call, and I certainly don't fault him for it. And I don't know if it's a good or bad call. Even like, no, look, I would tell you if I thought it was a good or bad call. I don't know if it's a good or bad call because I don't even necessarily know what my range 100% looks like in time, in real time against them. Because maybe I'm not limp re-raising the king jack. And if you just start to remove some king jacks, like over here, like let's say I just can't have king jack and ace 10. Let's just pretend. Same range minus those. Now he's going to be way worse, right? So you see now he's only 29%, right? So now he's just has an easy fold. So if we remove just even some of these busted, or some of these draws, it makes it way worse for him. You pick the wrong tournaments to back me on. I mean, look, if you're trying to back anyone, I would definitely recommend you spread your money around. Don't just put it all in one tournament because, you know, anything can happen in one tournament or one entry. I would definitely recommend spreading little bits around as opposed to loading up in one. But hey, you do whatever you want. I'm in every one. It's just my money and your money. It's not like I'm trying to free roll this or anything. I am in with all of you. I'm just giving you all a sweat because you all asked for it. All right, so anyway, we shove, we get call, we win. That's good. Let's take a look at another hand. Pocket queens. All right, we have a raise. Button calls. I re-raise to 19K out of 61 effective. Button calls. This is Chris Brewer, poker coaching coach. What's the name of that program? It's called Equilab. Poker Strategy Equilab. Get the free version. It is easy. Easy, free version. All right, flop comes King 8-2. We should probably continuation bet frequently and small. Pot's 45K. We go 32. I'm sorry, we go 14. 32 behind. Maybe even smaller is better. I think smaller probably is better. You may say, aren't you worried about the king? Yeah, but we have no chips. You got to realize, once the pot gets huge in relation to the stacks, either yours or your opponent's, I don't know who had more chips in the spot. This is a spot where you just have to be pretty happy putting your money in. We bet he calls. Turns a 5 of diamonds. We can check or bet. I decide to check to give him every possible opportunity to bluff. Chris Brewer is not afraid to bluff. If he bets, I'm calling. Check, check. River's a king, which is great for me. River is great for me because now there's fewer kings remaining in the deck. And on top of that, he realizes there's fewer kings remaining in the deck, and he's going to start finding some hero calls with pairs if I decide to go all in. This is definitely a spot you want to go all in, unless you think your opponent's range to float the flop is all sorts of garbage, and he's going to bet all sorts of the garbage if you check the river, which maybe he will, maybe he won't. Also, as he thinks you are crazier, you should be way more inclined to value bet. Now, look, I'm literally going to value bet every single time with queens, because queens can easily get called by some hands like any smaller medium pair, any pocket eights, maybe even ace queen or ace jack finds hero calls. So this is a super easy bet. I'm trying to think how wide I would actually shove in this spot, though. I think if I randomly had an 8, like 8-7, that's probably good enough. Now, that may leave my checking range very weak. You have to make sure you do protect your checking range, like we discussed earlier. But I think mixing it up between betting and checking with hands like any 8 or better is probably good. I bet a lot of people in this spot, though, if they have 9s, they just check it thinking, oh, I could be beat. But we have no chips. Pot's 73K. We have 32. Just got to put your money in. Natty says, check flop, bet 3/4 on the turn. I hate that idea. Notice if it goes check, check, and then we bet 3/4 on the turn. 3/4 would be what? 32K? We only have 46. Can't do that. Very rarely do you want to bet 32K out of your 46K. That is basically never a good idea, at least unless you're on the river. Usually you want to be betting either really tiny or all of it whenever you have only a pot size bet remaining. So we go tiny on the flop. I think I should have gone even smaller looking back. I should have gone like 10, just to kind of force him to stay in the pot with a lot of his range. And you got to realize Chris Brewer is a good, strong, world-class GTO player. If you've watched his content on pokercoaching.com, you know he is one of the best thinkers about poker in the game. He has a lot of new content coming out on pokercoaching.com very soon, actually. I'm excited for that. Hopefully all the poker coaching members are too. And especially against players who are very well studied and realize that pot odds exist. Small bets are great just because they know they have to call. They just have to call. And if you get them to the river with nothing, you know, well, they're going to realize they got to call a lot on the river too because of pot odds. And they got to bluff some on the river because, well, they have nothing. Anyway, we check the river. We check turn on the river. I do shove. He thought for a while as well, and he called. Once he called, I knew I won. He had ace queen for, you know, a bit of a hero call. I think if I'm value shoving any 8 or better, not that I have a lot of 8s, because remember it went raise and call and then 3-bet for a lot of my chips. But I will have pairs, you know, 9s and better here. This is a spot where I think the call might be a touch loose. But you got to realize, bluff catchers are all the same at this point, right? Within reason. So what does he want to block here? Well, he wants to block the kings, and he wants to block aces and queens and jacks and 10s and 9s. So how does he block the kings and aces, queens, jacks, 10s, and 9s? Well, the answer is by having an ace in his range, because that blocks ace, king, and aces. He wants to have a queen in his range, in his calling range, in his hand, because that blocks queens and king, queen. So if you think about it, this might be a much better bluff catcher than a random 8 or pocket 7s for sure. A lot of people don't get that concept. They think that, oh, 7s is way better than ace queen, but it's not. You would much rather have ace queen in the spot than pocket 7s because we're not value shoving ace-5 suited or ace-2 suited, I don't think. So if I'm not value shoving those, then he really just wants to block my value range, right? So what is my value range? It is any king. But remember, I 3-bet preflop, so I'm only going to have ace, king, king, queen, maybe king, jack, right? So not a lot of those. And he wants to block aces and queens, which would value shove as well as jacks, tens, nines. But you see the ace, king, the ace, queen is the best one because it blocks ace with the king, or king, all the kings with the ace kicker, as well as the aces. This is actually a really good bluff catching hand. He gave it some thought. He found the call. Again, I don't fault him for it if he thinks I'm getting after it some portion of the time. Knowing me, this is a spot where maybe I'm a little bit cautious in the small blind, as you should be. You shouldn't be going too nuts in the small blind. You should be very, very linear when you do 3-bet. But it's a cool spot where I think a lot of people like call with pocket 4s or pocket 7s, but they fold the ace queen. But I think the ace queen is actually going to be a way, way, way better call in general. If I'm value shoving that range I told you. Now, maybe in the GTO world, you are supposed to shove any pair on the river because you're so short. If that's the case, then maybe the blockers become less relevant. But if I am shoving the 8 and better, mainly pocket 9s and better, then I think the call's probably pretty good. Didn't work this time, though. All right, we have a raise. I 3-bet king 5 of hearts. Hijack calls. We are playing very deep stacked, 100 big blinds deep. Flop comes queen 8-2. He checks. We'll continuation bet. The advanced tournament course and advanced cash game course on pokercoaching.com discuss this spot a lot. When you do 3-bet these hands that are king X suited, even when you don't flop a flush draw or backdoor flush draw, you still typically want to keep betting with this exact hand because the king high is rarely good if you check it down. And if you do get a king on the turn, it's almost always good. So we're going to bet half pot. Someone asked earlier, should you be betting bigger? Well, this is a board where there's a flush draw and a straight draw, but no flush or straight no flush or straight yet. So this is a spot where you typically do want to bet on the bigger side compared to if it was queen 9-8 or jack 8-7. Obviously, I'd rather have a backdoor draw here. You probably don't need to bet this every time, but I think it's fine and good. And I think half pot's nice, especially since the pot's already kind of big because we 3-bet it pre-flop. Now, a lot of people may say, should you even 3-bet this king 5 suited pre-flop? And you don't have to every time. If you think the hijack's on the tight side, just fold. Put it right in the muck. You could also call this hand. I think a lot of people don't call the button quite enough with hands like this. I like to 3-bet these in general. I like 3-betting just good, strong, polarized ranges against most people who are good at poker. So I think this is reasonable. James says you'd be tempted to bet like 10K. The thing is, those, like right here, you don't really mind fold equity with much of anything, right? Because whatever the opponent has is going to have some equity in general. So if they're going to start folding out gut shots or random ace high or king high, that's like okay. So when the board is very dynamic, as it is here, meaning there's flush draws and straight draws, typically you want to bet on the bigger side. If this was a single raise pot, I'd be betting closer to like 3/4 pot or maybe even pot. But in a 3-bet pot, I think half pot's fine. If you bet small, they're just going to call everything, and that forces you to double barrel and triple barrel with a lot of your bluffs. And, you know, spoiler alert, we're going to do it. But this is a spot where I think you don't mind folds. All right, so he calls, turn to 6 of diamonds, he checks. Now, this is a spot where when you keep betting the turn, you want to be betting with your best made hands and some draws. Now, what are draws? In this spot, you want to make sure that your draws are hands that either have an easy continue if you get raised, or draws that are just so garbage that you can easily fold if you get raised. So hands that can easily continue are going to be straight and flush draws, right? Now, that said, if your opponent's going to be check jamming you, maybe you don't want to bet those. Because like say you did have 10-9 of clubs. If you bet 30 and your opponent shoves it all in, I mean, you probably have to fold. It's close, right? So if you think you are getting to that point where the opponent will shove all in, then you don't want to be betting those. Essentially, you don't want to be betting draws that would have to fold or barely call if you get shoved. You want to be betting draws that are just slam dunk calls, like ace high flush draw is usually a slam dunk call because it beats all the other draws. Or pair plus flush draw is usually a slam dunk call because you beat all the other draws. So those are usually pretty good to bet. And then you want to bet some junky ones. So what are junky ones here? Well, I don't have like 10-7 of hearts pre-flop, right? I'm not going to play that probably. I guess I could have it. So maybe 10-7 of hearts would be a good one for just a turned gut shot. I don't really want to bet like Jack 10 because Jack 10 has decent equity against everything, right? So that's probably one I don't necessarily want to bet. Low and medium flush draws probably don't want to bet. Probably bet the worst ones, but do I really have the 4-3 of clubs? Like probably not. I'm not really going to play that one very often. So this is a spot where I think the gut shots probably don't want to bet unless they're the absolute worst gut shots, but I don't think the worst gut shots are in my range so much. You have to be careful with the junky flush draws too, because you don't want to bet junky flush draw and get shoved. So fine. Okay. You also want to be betting some really, really bad draws, right? So what are the really bad draws if I don't want to be betting gut shots? If I don't want to be betting the decent gut shots like Jack 10, find me some additional draws, right? Well, what are some hands that have some equity that don't mind folding to a shove? If you think about it, it's very clearly overcard to the top card on the board. And that's going to be the king. Any king in this spot, in my mind, is going to be a pretty reasonable hand to bluff. If we get called, are we going to bluff again on the river? Yes, because we need to try to make ace-high flush draw and junky pair plus flush draw fold. Okay? We bet 30. He lets it go. Fine and good. This is a spot, though, where I think a lot of people don't 3-bet at preflop. They just fold. They don't bet the flop. They just check it back. And then they don't bet the turn. They would have played this hand very differently, but this is guaranteed GTO approved. And don't be afraid to do it. King X suited is something a lot of you can easily add to your arsenal today, right now, and that's going to increase your win rate a lot. He folds good. All right, 8-7 suited. I actually reviewed this hand already in last week's episode, so we're not going to do it again. Another 8-7 suited. We raise it up. Oh, I'm sorry. We reviewed this from last week, too. I have to get going soon, which is why I'm rushing through these. Here we go. Here I have a hand against Jeremy Becker. Jeremy Becker decided to just get after it and try to crush me in this hand. 40 big blinds deep, ace queen. I'm limping a ton. He checks. 10-6-6. I decide to bet small. Straight up for value, straight up for protection. He calls. Turns to 6. I decide to bet small. Straight up for value, straight up for protection. He calls. River's a 4. Flush gets there. I check. He bets half pot. Okay. He could obviously have a boat with a 10. 4 is kind of unlikely. Would he value bet flush on the river? Probably. We have the Queen of Hearts blocker, which is a thing. This is a spot where maybe I'm supposed to just fold the river. I don't know. The thing is, I've seen Becker do some pretty wild stuff. He's definitely not afraid to bluff. I found that a lot of the players like Becker who have done very well in the smaller stakes games, who are moving up to the bigger stakes games, they know how to play the turn and the river really well, in general. When I say well, okay, well is an interesting term. They know how to get after it on the turn and the river. They are the types of players who will just try to get to the river and try to apply pressure and try to win the pots because most people overfold on the river to aggression in general. And a lot of people don't protect their checking range well. So, going back to what we were talking about before. What am I checking on the river? They can call. Well, if I had a 10, I'm just going to bet, right? So I can have some flushes, maybe. I could have some 4s. I can have some ace highs, right? And this is obviously a good ace high because it beats other ace highs. Notice we don't chop with ace highs, we beat ace highs. That may go for thin value, who in the world knows? So I think if my opponent is weak and tight and straightforward, this is just an easy fold, but I think against someone who is capable of finding lots of bluffs on the river, and notice there are a lot of bluffs on the river available, like 9-8, 9-7, 8-7, 7-5, king, queen, queen, jack, queen, 9, all that stuff. If he's going to find bluffs on the river with those hands, then I think we have a trivially easy call. And also, if he's just going to float me on the flop and the turn and get to the river and try to figure it out, then I think we also have a trivially easy call. I call. And we lose to the Queen 4 offsuit. This is optimistic. I mean, look, this is a spot where I think this is exactly what I was talking about, right? This is the type of hand where like I would have just fold into the flop bet, probably. Maybe call the flop and then fold the turn. But he's going to stick around and try to boss me on the river. This time he got the pair, and instead I get bossed. I just remember one of these 8-7 hands is the good one where I lost a bunch of chips. Where's my document? Where's my document? It is hand number 26. I want to go through this one because it was a funny one. There we go. We'll go through this hand, then I got to get out of here. Oh, this is not it. This is not it. It's hand number 30. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I was playing against a young 21-year-old player who decided to get me. I raised it up with 8-7 of spades. I think we were deeper stacked than this. Got hijack call, big blind call, 8-7-4. He leads minimum. We were definitely deeper stacked than this. Whoever entered my hands didn't enter them correctly. Sorry about this. So we raise 8-7 of spades. Hijack calls, big blind, unknown, 21-year-old player. Calls, leads minimum on the flop. Okay, so when you face tiny leads, or tiny bets in general, you want to be raising more often than you may naturally think. And in this spot, I think you want to be raising pretty aggressively. Like any 8's probably pretty good, because you can just raise any 8 and get the money in. It is hard to find bluffs in this spot, because you don't really want to raise draws that have to fold to a shove, right? So you really only be raising decent flush draws and pair plus draw type hands. I don't think you want to be raising too many 6s or 5s, but luckily for me, I don't really have too many 6s or 5s, right? So cool spot. I make it 28K with the top 2 pair, which is an easy raise in my mind. You may say, is this hand too good to raise? And I don't think so. I think even though there is a straight available already, I can just happily get this in for 40 big blinds or something like that. Hijack folds, big blind, rips it all in. Now, obviously, we're going to call with this. My question, though, is what is the worst hand you want to call with in this scenario? I think if we raised with any pair has to call. You may say, but any pair loses to any other pair, right? Well, luckily, my pair here is going to be ace-4 or better, right? So that's good. And the thing is there's a ton of draws available. Also, in general, this is a bit of a read, but maybe accurate, maybe not. Young players like to play aggressively. They have not been punished enough by the real world to know that they can't just go nuts and blast it in all the time whenever they feel like it. And quite often, the players who made it to the Poker Go studio by the time they're 21 have ran especially hot earlier in their career. Not saying that's what happened to this player, but in general. Most players who've accumulated enough money by the age of 21 to buy into $10,000 buy-in tournaments, they're probably good, but they've probably been a little bit lucky. And that's okay. How do you get super lucky? Well, usually you're in there blasting. So if they're in there blasting, then I think this any pair is an easy call because there's lots of draws available. And you may say, say I had ace-4, you're really loving it against queen jack of diamonds. No, but there's way worse draws than queen jack of diamonds. He could be sitting here with a 6 or a 5 that's just deciding to go nuts. He's may or may not have very many 7s here. Like, is he going to play 7-6 this way? I don't know. But just to be clear, a 4 is like the worst hand, right? JP says you're probably only good here about 70% of the time. You always lose the other 30 and are drawing dead sometimes. Completely incorrect. Completely incorrect. This is a spot where, well, look, 8-7's the nuts. If we were talking about pocket, like ace-4, yeah, I agree with that. I mean, ace-4 is like close to break even, but remember, pot odds, right? We have to put in 100 to try to win, what, 300? We only need to be good 33% of the time. Everybody always forgets about pot odds. Like right here, if you're good 70% of the time, you're loving it. You only got to win 30%, 33% of the time. Pot odds are real. Now, we are kind of deeper in the tournament, so there are some payout implications. Maybe we need to be good 35% of the time, 38% of the time, something like that. But that's plenty good enough. So maybe a 4 is close, but if we had like a 7, I think it's a trivially easy call. If we had any sort of nut draw, it's a trivially easy call. So yeah, easy call here. Yeah, how's he drawing dead? He can always make a full house. Indeed. We call. Ace-6 offsuit. He drilled me, and I was out. We had more chips in this, by the way, too. I think we weren't getting quite as good a pot odds, but look, top 2 pairs of nuts. I think a lot of people forget that good players know how to bluff. We are not playing tiny stakes tournaments against bad players. We are playing high stakes tournaments against some of the best players in the world who are not afraid to bluff. You remember that Daniel Negreanu hand I played a while back at the final table of the Poker Masters? No. The the Poker Go Cup, where we were like 6-handed at the final table. He raised the button. I called the big blind with 10-9 offsuit. It comes ace 9-8. So I have middle pair. I check. Negreanu bets. I call. Turn some brick. I check. He bets. I call. Turn river some other brick. I check. He goes all in. I'm sitting there with second pair. Bad kicker. And I call. And the commentators were sitting there saying, how could he call? Negreanu always has it here. But not that time. Negreanu was sitting there with a jack 4 for fun. And it's because he's not a weak, tight knit. This guy, 21-year-old players, definitely not weak, tight knit, right? And, sure, the guy could have shown me the straight. Could have. But more often than not, they're not. When you're playing against good players, you have to be somewhat call happy. Best case scenario, you're hoping for aces and kings and ace-king. What? I don't even know what you're talking about here. Guy never has aces, kings, or ace-king. Maybe you're talking about something different. He couldn't have expected to have too much fold equity, right? I don't know. He probably thinks I'm an old, weak, tight knit, apparently, to just decided to crush me with the ace-7 offsuit or the ace-6 offsuit for fun. I don't know. This is an example, though, of like how a lot of younger players play, or especially players who have come from smaller stakes and are trying to move up. This play is fine if you're playing against players who are going to raise pocket 9s and fold it to a shove because they're so weak. They think, oh, it must be against the straight or it must be against the set. No. Like I just told you, I'm not folding a 4. So this is a spot where I think a lot of people don't call enough, like I just said. I think this is a spot where you just got to find the call button. 33%'s not hard to achieve if your opponent has bluffs in their range. And obviously if shoving gut shots and overcards, then you got to call. That's me for today. I have to get out of here a little bit early. Thank you all for being here. If you enjoyed today's show, click the like button, click the subscribe button, click the notification bell, click all the buttons. Thank you. Good luck in your games. Have fun. I wish you all the best of luck. Hope you have a wonderful week. Will I be back here on Monday? Let me see. I know I have a busy schedule planned. Yes, I will be back here on Monday. We also have a poker coaching webinar too on Monday. So make sure you take care of that. Do your homework. Do good work. Good luck in your games. Click the buttons before you go. Thank you. I'll talk to all of you next time.